Excellent. Fantastic. Okay. So here we are. Welcome back to 2022, the beginning of what is going to be most likely an absolutely incredible year. So it's just, it's on, hopefully we're all on the back end of the COVID crazy, and things will start to open up, and we'll start to get some really exciting things coming through, especially all the opportunities that people have been working on over the last 12 to 18 months. Today's session, I wanted to just start with a bit of a story, which I wanted to lead to a quick discussion. So it's a small group today. So Maurice, if you could maybe split the team into two for a breakout in just a couple of minutes. I might just set the scene for people to jump out, do some quick introductions, and have a quick chat about something specific. We started this morning, everybody was talking about the different languages that they speak, and Anthony can say a few words in many languages. Maurice can actually speak quite a few languages. And we had an amazing start to this year, which I just wanted to share with you, which was going to be the topic for our first breakout for our conversation. And that is about the skills you have, or the skills you've learned that you didn't realize were valuable. And I'll give you the perfect example. So we organized for our daughter, 18-year-old daughter, to do a gap year. Yeah. So 2 years of COVID, finishing year 12, all these lockdowns, studying, home, difficult socially, like for many, many kids. And the opportunity to go to uni next year was one where it looks like there's still more, people studying at home, again, continuing this, strange way of studying and socializing. And so we supported her to do a gap year. And we organized a really incredible program, which children from all over the world, they travel to Israel and they volunteer, they do internships, they do all sorts of incredible things. And so our daughter, she doesn't speak a word of Hebrew, of course, and it's just never really been away from home for a long time. And so she's organized to go on a 12-month gap year program, right? 12 months away. And she lands, and when she flies out, on the way, they're at Dubai airport, and there's a lady there looking lost. So she comes up to her, and the lady doesn't speak a word of English, but she speaks Russian. And so my daughter, who is 18 years old, has learned Russian and speaks Russian with us at home, starts talking to her in Russian to help her find the bathroom. Step one. She lands in Israel, gets COVID tested. She has COVID, is straight into lockdown, which they were expecting. After a week, she's let out of isolation, and immediately, as you would if you're 18 years old, 2 years in isolation, in Melbourne, and land in Tel Aviv, the place where everyone parties. The people that she's staying with, they've got friends, they go out. Who does she meet? Friends who don't speak English much. They speak Hebrew, but she doesn't. But they speak Russian, and so she communicates with them in Russian. A few days later, she needs to go and have a meeting. She catches a bus, gets completely lost. Her phone dies. She has no way, she doesn't know where she is. And so she walks up to this person on the street, and turns out the only language they have in common is Russian. This is interesting. Her whole life, we've been like, you've got to learn Russian. She's like, I don't need it. Talking to grandparents a little bit, and we speak English at home, so the Russian was always in the background. This lady says to her, look, I can't help you with charging your phone, but there's a deli around the corner. Once you go to this deli, they'll help you out. She goes in, Russian deli, outside of Tel Aviv. They meet her. She's like, Melissa talks to them in Russian. She's like, sorry, my phone is dead. I'm trying to find this appointment. I don't know how to do it. She's like, don't worry, here, go have some tea. They sit her down, they give her some food, they charge her phone and help her get on her way. And when she gets home, she's like, all these adventures. She goes, this is unbelievable. Thank you so much. She called us and said, thank you so much for forcing me and giving me Russian. all of this time, all these Saturday schools sort of being forced to go and hang and learn Russian, to read and write. She goes, I can't believe how incredibly helpful that is. She goes, I didn't even realize I had that much, language available to be able to communicate. But it's opened up so many doors in a country where the common language isn't English. It's actually, well, it is, but not everywhere. But Russian has saved her. And so it's just one of these, and I guess I was thinking about this because here we are going into a year of, things opening up. The world has really shifted. And what I'd like you to do is, we'll do a quick breakout, and I'd like you to just take a moment and to think about what is a skill or a talent or something that is way back, maybe you never really appreciated it, but you really do appreciate it now. Something that maybe it was instilled in you by your parents, or looking at your kids or your friends, or just, something that you wouldn't have believed maybe could be useful, but actually is really, really helpful in this world that we're in at the moment. And that's what I'd like you to share in our first breakout. And hopefully we'll see lots of smiles when people come back. And then we'll open the floor for people to share something that moves them the most. So in your group, somebody will share something that really inspired them or was a really interesting story. Sound great? Maurice, thank you so much. We'll see you back in 5 minutes.
Maurice and Vlad, you okay for me to go to room 2?
Yeah, and I might drop into, which one am I in, Maurice?
Yeah, you can go in and I'll join room number 1. So there'll be 5 per room.
Okay, perfect. Anthony. Oh, okay. Okay, I'll join the other room. All right.
How long do you...
I might just hang here. So how many people? There's 5 per room.
There's four currently. So if we each join, it'll be 5 per room.
There's 4 in each room, and now there'll be... Okay. Let's just do in a room. Are you able to bring everybody back?
Bring everybody back.
If you join a room, do you need to?
Yeah. I can come back. The question is when? At 10 o'clock, 15 minutes?
Let's keep it shorter. Let's go. It's 9:44. Yeah. So let's go at 9:50. We'll bring people back.
9:50.
Is that too short, you think?
I think that gives everyone 1 minute to share. That's pretty short. Let's go 55.
All right, let's go. Let's go 10 minutes. Okay, let's go. Let's go bring everybody back at 9:55. Yeah?
All right, 55.
Okay, I'm joining the room.
Sounds good.
Cool, man. It was very funny. Julie was right in the middle of telling us how the French don't like the British. I've never heard that story before. I was like a shock. That was awesome. So why don't we? So everyone's just on mute. So who should I single out? Matt, who was in your group that really blew you away?
I think the big thing out of our group was is the lunch happening on the 2nd of March?
What's that?
Is the lunch happening on the 2nd of March? Because we just want to do face-to-face.
Oh, okay. That would be really great. But
I think everyone's got a fairly sort of common theme in there in the end. So everyone's sort of been through it, and just I talked a bit about we sort of in the end a lot of it just came back to what I sort of said around resilience. I think was probably the main thing in the end. So
yeah, that's cool. We had some really interesting conversations in our group as well, from language through to negative role models that when you realize they have actually a positive impact on your life, even though at the time it's hard to recognize. I thought that was really extraordinary. So, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you jumping in. So, with that in mind, with this kind of the thinking about what is it that we have that we can bring to the table, I want to bring this group together for an open conversation around the areas that we're going to see really expand in 2022. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to contrast it. What did we see in 21? What were the things that we saw was extraordinary? And what do we want to double down on this year? I'd also like to maybe give Anthony an opportunity to also just give us some direction later today around Symphony 7 and where that's going, the growth and the way that the different hubs will start working together and maybe utilizing, was an example, the GNT hub and the work we'll be doing here with some of the customers as well. So just an example, start to bring things together this year, leveraging the work that we've done last year. So from 2021, maybe what I might do is maybe I'll throw to a few of you and just ask you what you thought were standout things in the space that we're working in. So we're chasing zero 2030, net zero by 2030. There's been many industries. We, as a cross section, even our small group today, very broad cross section. And so what I might do is that if you're comfortable, I might just sort of go along my screen and just give everybody maybe, a minute or so just to talk about what of 2021 you thought was really extraordinary in our space, and whether or not you feel 2022 is going to be more of that, or is that something that maybe isn't as relevant in the coming year? So really your thoughts on 2021 from what happened that was really extraordinary in our space, and I'll add some more to that from the experiences that we've had, over the years as well. So on my screen, from left to right, David, you're the first one on my screen. So I might just open the mic to you. Thoughts on 2021 and how that will, go through 22. You're just on mute, David. That's okay. There's always one. You can go first.
It's not something I'm in control of. Somebody unmutes me. I guess the thing that I noticed being involved in the energy world is that there's quite a few retailers now offering carbon offset energy as part of their standard offerings, whereas traditionally that was up to the individual to try and plant trees or offset their carbon footprint some other way. So that's been quite a transition we've seen in our industry, in the energy industry. Where that will lead, I suspect that just about every energy company is going to have to go down that road. Australia is probably one of the first in the world to do that. So I expect that that's going to start to spread through some of the major countries as well.
And it's interesting too, because it always seemed that Australia was going to be the laggard, whether it would happen ever. And then suddenly the momentum has really picked up. Do you think there's something that's happened that's been the major trigger? I mean, there's obviously been the government support for that, but
well, I think in one respect they're losing a lot of customers because rooftop solar has got a huge penetration in the Australian market. We're over 20%, approaching 25% of residential properties now have rooftop solar, and these are companies that have traditionally made money by selling more. So they now have to engage with these customers that are voting with their own money to say, we want clean energy and we want to have more control.
Yeah. No, I agree. Thanks, David. Okay, Julie, so hand it over to you.
Yeah, look, yeah, thanks, Vlad. Yeah, I was just reflecting on probably the macro, which is how my brain usually goes, meaning that with COVID, we've all come to realise that there's a glowing, there's an awareness that we are all connected as people, and you know, you can't escape, you know, so if you do something that's wrong for the planet, you know, you're going to affect people. So that interconnectivity, I think there's a growing awareness, which is probably a bit like the Indigenous people. They already, you know, that's what they do, you know, the connection to land. So I think the ramifications of that going forward is quite profound, because, you know, if we can all sort of understand that what we do in terms of our actions can affect, you know, the circular economy, for example, buying a fridge, you know, buying whatever you buy, the packaging, the whole sort of sustainability cycle, the more people are aware, I think the more likely we are to save our planet. So that gives me hope.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That's a bit, you know, high level, I guess, but
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's just absolutely, you know, people have had the time, you know, in these last 2 years where everything was just focused at the beginning on COVID and reduction and protection and keep everybody safe, and everybody's just so focused on the lockdown. And as we move through, particularly here in Australia, particularly in Melbourne, you know, like, 18 months of hardcore lockdown, there's been, but everywhere in the world, people have had some time to just reflect lives. As we saw, you know, we see the Great Resignation. That's a good example. People are like, I will not just work just to work, or I need more. And so people are shifting and making decisions that are different. And that trigger with COVID has given, I think, people also the ability to just to research, to understand more. You know, I'm having conversations about sustainability and climate change and so forth with people that before, you know, even my close friends are just like, this is just, you know, it's not important. You know, I'm busy, I'm making a living, I've got to work, I've got to pay the mortgage. Whereas something differently has happened over these 2 years, you know, especially last year, where people just stand and really just focused on what they're going to do with their life and how does that impact, and what is happening, you know, and the environment and the world and how it's being impacted by their decisions. Buying, you know, single-use plastics, packaging, through to buying a fridge and hold on a second, what happens with the fridge when I need to throw it out? Well, no one's got a plan for that. Oh, okay, what about this? Why is it coming all this styrofoam? Where's that styrofoam going? Oh, it's just been melted and stored. Okay, that's really. So it's just conversations that you just would never have had before. Definitely are happening much more broadly in every industry. Yeah, that's so true. Do you think there's going to be a particular industry that's going to really feel the circular economy piece? Do you think there'll be any particular standout?
Oh, yeah, who's going to change? Well, I think coal and gas industries, you know, I wouldn't like to be on their boards really at the moment. Woodside, and look, I mean, I know, for example, with Woodside, you know, with my Greening Australia director hat on, I mean, we actually sell them carbon credits. So, you know, I suppose that's an upside, but they're still gas producers, right? So, but then again, you know, when you look at the big picture, you know, there's going to be this shift from solar, which is what, you know, David was saying, the renewable energy sector will be growing as we shift. There will be, and there's a transition away from coal and gas. So what that eventually looks like, we don't quite know, do we? But it's all about, you know, trying to understand the industry you're in and then looking at the climate impacts for that sector. And it's different for every single industry.
Yeah, no, it's really true. That's really insightful. Maybe I'll just throw over because I think it's actually really relevant. And Ivana, you're the next one on the list. So it's just perfect segue as well, you know, when it comes to, you know, with what's going to be impacted circular economy? What like? What's your view?
We've been seeing a lot of businesses that have realized they need to make the switch to, like, sustainable packaging was mentioned, and other product alternatives. And that's essentially what we do, is setting them up with sustainable supply chains. But what we've realized is that most industries at the moment, due to the impact of COVID, they're struggling to stay open, let alone look at new supply chains. So that's our biggest barrier, and that's one of the barriers that we've seen just across all sectors. And one of the reasons we actually switched our target market to focus on heavy industries currently is because they can still stay open and function in the COVID economy. And they are under a lot of consumer pressure to essentially reach net zero, especially the mining sectors and that sort of area. But I suppose really hoping now that, call it hope if you want, but if people start to realize, we need to live with COVID, maybe they can actually start to realize they need to make the sustainable switch. And I suppose that's my goals and hopes for 2022, is that they realize, yes, COVID's everywhere, but we may as well just get it over with, learn to live with it, and focus on climate action.
Yeah. When with the businesses that you see that who are able to stay open, and who are, especially the larger industry ones, are there particular products, are there particular areas that they are focusing on first? Are you noticing any trends that are sort of changed?
They're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
They're at that transition stage now where they're trying to figure out exactly what they can focus on and what will be an actual economic advantage for them to be able to switch. And that's one of the biggest barriers, like the common misconception that environmentally friendly products are more expensive. And that's probably that is essentially our biggest barrier when it comes to getting clients as well. So it's getting those case studies and showing these people and businesses, like, well, actually there is an economic advantage to switching to sustainable practices. Because of the greenwashing that's been happening by the heavy industries and like the coal and gas sectors for the past 50 years, it's going to take a lot to be able to actually convince those people that a green economy is a viable alternative to the current life.
I think it's a very interesting point, especially when we look at the impact of greenwashing at the larger industries, that people start to distrust, that really start to distrust. So they go, well, that's great, but is it really? Especially, I think, when we saw the impact of recycling, look, the recycling's happening, and suddenly you see that actually very little recycling is happening. So, and I think that's interesting to see what happens this year as the move away from the idea that waste needs to be buried or burned or destroyed to waste as a resource.
Yeah, we regularly use the term recovered resources in our marketing, just to be able to put out there, like, no, it's not waste until it is waste. Everything can and will and should have a future life.
Yeah. It's interesting as well around recovered resources, where I think I have a debate fairly regularly with people when we look at waste to energy, and it's one of those things where it's like, yes, great, yes, we can generate energy from the waste, just burn it to do what we need to, but is there a way to upcycle that? Like, can we, instead of just burning it, do something more with it to create greater value? And I think that's a conversation that's happening much more regularly. Our project we've got with tires, but we're seeing with other municipal waste, we're seeing it with polystyrene packaging. These sort of conversations. Matt's involved heavily with cladding. How do you take that, instead of just destroy it and just maybe burn it, to actually go, okay, what can be recovered and what can be upcycled? I think it's a really interesting space.
Definitely a huge topic of interest to everyone at the moment, and I think all eyes will be watching that sector to see what actually happens.
Yeah. Are you, just one more question for you as well. Are you finding the products that you can replace, the sustainable products? Is there much from Australia? Is the Australian industry catching up, or is nearly everything from overseas?
I think Europe's still leading right now. Probably I would say 70% of the high-end sustainable alternatives I've found are coming out of places like Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Amazing. So opportunities this year for Australian industry.
Absolutely.
Manufacturing, that's got to be it. Thanks, Ivana. Stephen, you're next on my list. I'd love to hear your comments. What you're finding, what you found 2021 was interesting, and what's going to happen in 2022. Feel free to comment on any other ones as well.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Vlad. And sort of building on what Ivana particularly had to say. So I think standout things, of course, is COP26 and the matters raised there. And then in terms of how that orients around Australia, we've got a lot of impetus in relation to net zero transitions. So that's not because of the business case for net zero as much as the top-down imperative from government now. So they're setting targets, which is then creating a business case for others to follow suit. So a lot of the work we're doing is supporting local governments, state government organisations and bodies to develop net zero pathways. So there was quite a bit of traction and movement in that space last year, and you've seen a similar thing around circularity, so that fits into that as well, with local precinct type initiatives to ignite and catalyse those sorts of transitions to support communities to move and businesses to move from the old ways of doing things to the new ways of doing things. So a lot of that change management thing. Electrification is a big part of that. So we saw a lot of movement in terms of electrification, and the innovation space around that is really quite dynamic. And electrification, of course, is a big part of that transition to net zero, and especially around embodied carbon as well. So we're seeing a lot of interest now in not only operational reductions in carbon and energy, but also in relation to the embodied carbon within buildings and infrastructure and things like that. And the fact that that's going to potentially create legacies, either good or bad, going forward. So at least having that front of mind when making business decisions. And I think lastly is La Nina. So the fact that, we're all subject to Mother Nature. La Nina is a different weather system that we haven't seen in more recent times, but people often view La Nina as alleviating drought, but it creates other challenges as well. So having front of mind that all these things do have a bigger part to play in our broader environment, our weather systems, and our way of life. So it helps reinforce some of those decision-making processes around net zero transitions and things like that.
Oh,
that's it from me, Vlad.
Well, I tell you what, that's actually quite a lot there. Your team is also Blue Tribe's involved in the MECLA as well, yeah? So with the embodied carbon work, you guys participate in that?
So MECLA was originally conceived as a buyers alliance to support the uptake of low emissions building materials. And it's evolved now into more of a social space to support organisations to do that. We had a parallel project which looked at other innovative ways that we could support the market for low emissions building materials with a focus on low emissions concrete. So we developed with industry 3 ideas that we've put back to the state government to help support industry.
Got it. And that work seemed really interesting. So we had Monica join, Monica Richter from MECLA and WWF join us for a catch-up in Sydney. It was amazing to hear from her. Just the work and the engagement, but also the limitations too. The barriers, in the industry, which is one of those things where building the developers, those who, like there's costs, there's, process, there's like old way, continued, no change, finding cheapest possible ways. So I think there's some interesting barriers in the, especially in the development of, buildings and so forth. I was just going to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, sorry, but I was going to say, I mean, MEC was a coalition of the converted, so it's a lot of sustainability managers that are already on board, and what we were doing is working with those that are the bigger decision makers within those large organisations to make the uptake of the low emissions materials BAU. So how do we ignite change at various decision making points within some of these big infrastructure organisations? Standards. So there's a whole range of things that need to be done to support organisations in that endeavour. It's a complex space. I mean, concrete's been around for many years. Its use is well known. People are confident in its use. To try and shift people from using standard Portland cement to a low carbon alternative is a very tricky scenario.
In concrete, we're seeing some really interesting innovation from around the world, especially in concrete, where they call it all different names. This crete, that crete. We've got hempcrete that we're looking at. Somebody setting up, in Queensland at the moment. Is the industry interested enough? Do you think, like the big players?
They're occupying a watching brief, and they have some trials and tests, but in terms of broad scale uptake, no, not at this point. And the trouble is, it's the risk aversion and the return on investment. So they're things that need to be specifically addressed. A lot of the scenarios with concrete is you don't have long-term demonstration projects to show the efficacy of some of these alternate products. So if you're building a bridge, they're not going to try something that doesn't have a 50-year design life that's proven. So there are those inherent challenges.
Yeah, but there are, and I'd probably comment one other thing when you talk about the pathways, especially the electrification of everything. It's very interesting. Especially in the Hunter, are you seeing their significant shift, like especially heavy machinery and so forth? Moving away from diesel. There's a hydrogen conversation, and then there's the electrification of everything. What have you got a view on how that's going, especially sort of in the region, New South Wales and the Hunter and so forth?
So the Hunter, we're part of. We led a project for the state government to bring together a group, local businesses, local government, state government bodies to develop a net zero plan to help the transition for the Hunter. So things are very much in the early stages. It's looking at converting existing mining sites and other heavy industries to that low carbon future, reskilling, upskilling, switching from existing ways of repurposing ports and things like that, perhaps for hydrogen distribution and things like that. So there's movement afoot, but it's still very much in its formative stages.
Yeah, it's a really interesting space as well. And maybe I'll just just share. I think it was on LinkedIn. Somebody sent a really an unusual meme which just caught my attention, which was there's a classroom and the teacher's turning away from the class and says, "I'm thinking of a question. What's the answer?" And everyone puts their hand up, says, "Hydrogen." So it's just, and I was thinking that's interesting because it does seem to be so ubiquitous. Almost every conversation ends in what's the hydrogen component of it. Even from work some work that we're doing with James with recycling of tires, looking at that at the old mine sites. As long as it's got the word at the end. Hold on a sec. That's going to be good. All right, let's have a look at that.
Look, hydrogen may or may not be the answer for different scenarios, different contexts, but I think it's raising the discussion and it's raising awareness as to alternatives. So rather than just sticking to the old way of fossil fuels, people are now there's this literacy, there's this greater literacy around alternatives. the next stage is to build a greater depth of understanding as to what that actually means.
Yeah, I love the race. There seems to be almost like a race to go. So hydrogen vehicles, but then the EVs are pushing so strongly. Especially industry. I'm finding that to be a really interesting conversation because you're right. There's more conversation, but there's also an agreement that moving away from the traditional fuels is a must. So suddenly everybody's pushing forward and so much harder. Yeah, I totally agree. Thanks, Stephen. I might just flick to the next one. So Murray, you're next on my list. Thank you. What's your take on 21 and the future for 22?
Well, it's first of all, I apologise for not having a shave this morning. That's why I haven't had a shave. But apart from that,
a one-time pass only.
All right, I had to get up to watch this group, so it's been very interesting though. Ivana and Stephen, you both said things that are very relevant to what I'm looking at, and that is heavy industry and the use of energy such as hydrogen, which can be used instead of what they use at the moment. For example, coal, well, not so much coal, but gas. And it's interesting that you were talking about that because Japanese looking in Gladstone Port at something that they've designed that can use gas, yes. And we all know that the Gladstone Port, they were jumping up and down about the fact that it was going to use a fossil fuel. Well, the technology that they've been able to produce is something that can use ammonia, that can be, is how you can transport it. But once it gets to a certain temperature, it becomes, it works as hydrogen through the same piece of machinery. And for heavy industry in particular, this is important because as Ivana and Stephen were talking about, heavy industries are still working, but they need to go to a more green way of doing it. And most certainly that's something I've placed some focus on because of my interest in, because this is a Japanese invention and I have an interest in Japan.
Got it. And I think that's actually very interesting because that conversation around the transport of hydrogen and the safety,
yes,
where there's that point where, what do you call it, the nexus or whatever, where with safety and transport, it all becomes much easier where things are done in line and there's an inherent
yes.
level of safety. Suddenly, then it becomes usable, everywhere. Completely accessible and reduces a lot of worry and concern.
So the issue exactly is about ammonia. You can transport it very easily as ammonia to different parts in the world, not just Japan, but anywhere in the world. We can produce it here in Australia as ammonia, but then can be exported anywhere because at a certain temperature that breaks down into nitrogen and hydrogen, which is what it's made up of, and the hydrogen at that temperature can then be used in heavy industry, and it can be then very utilized, if you like, instead of using a fossil fuel, which of course is the thing we're trying to transition away from.
Yeah, that's right. The creation of ammonia, what is the process they use? I thought that
well,
also...
you're asking as was used by the Stephen. It hasn't been put in place yet, so the issue is it's formative, it's new, it's something, however, that needs to be taken up quickly. Look, we must obviously all know amongst ourselves here that they've known about the issues with climate change and that it's had a 90-degree almost from being flat to just going up like that suddenly during the industrial revolution, if so to speak, which brought obviously many people out of being poor, but of course has caused pollution in the atmosphere. And obviously this is what's the right term? We need to find a way, transition, and convince heavy industry that there's another way.
Yeah, and a safe way and worth testing.
And soon.
Yeah.
And you talked about net zero emissions by 2030. It can be done.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because from a perspective of what's the norm and what there's a risk profile, and there's a number of people have mentioned, you know, there's the risk and return on investment. Someone's got to be doing the trials. You know, someone's got to be testing it. Someone's got to be out there sort of pushing the boundaries. You know, we're seeing, you know, with the issue with the urea problem, you know, last year it became at the end of the year as a massive issue. Suddenly we can't get AdBlue. And so, you know, we organised to have a European fuel treatment available to trial, you know, to bring in to replace the AdBlue. And it's just amazing, just the worry and the concern about if something doesn't work, suddenly it's going to hit, you know, it's going to impact us. We won't be able to drive, we won't be able to, you know, deliver. And so finding those companies that are interested in being in the demonstration projects, in the trials, is so important as part of that transition we've been finding in all sorts of different industries.
My understanding is that given the technology is now available, there's no reason to delay beginning that transition. I was super impressed in how far they've got so far, that companies have already started in Japan, working in Australia to change this system away from fossil fuels to using hydrogen instead.
Awesome. Oh, that's awesome. I'd love you to share the company details if you can, just in the chat or in the group. That'd be something you'd be quite interested in having a look at, actually, Murray.
Yep.
Thanks so much. New guest today, Sarah, you're next on my screen. Would love to hear from you, hear a little bit about you. Most of the people on this call know each other quite well.
Okay, thank you, Vlad, for this. I must say that we touched so many points here, from the interconnection that we noticed with COVID, with Julie, and with the COP26, with what Ivana say, and Stephen, and now Murray about the hydrogen. But if I have to choose something from 2021, it would be the COP26, because we have seen this amazing interest and media coverage and it was really the first time. Let's not talk about the output of COP26, that was a bit underwhelming, and Australia winning the colossal fuels award. So, you know, Australia is not in a good place in that. So I wish I could be so optimistic in that, because it's not like this. So in the future, this is the past, the 2021. What I wish, but I don't know if it's going to happen, for 2022 is, you know, more interest in the speeding up the net zero transition, because climate change is not just an environmental issue. This is clear at the United Nations, it is clear among professionals like us, but it's not clear in the world and in the business world. In the business world, we are at the managing phase, where we are still trying to do the business case for sustainability, but really this is, I did the first business case for sustainability, honestly, 10 years ago in any. So it, you know, we should be past that age, but we are not. So there's a lot here. Even when we talk about strategies like hydrogen or electric vehicles, we touch this. We can't do that. We need to apply backcasting. So if we want to be where do we want to be in 2025? We need to backcast. We don't need to plan, because otherwise, if we choose electric vehicles or we choose hydrogen, it's the infrastructure is going to be very different, and we need to invest now to build those kind of infrastructure. So it's very important to decide where are we going to do. We can't wait this decision, because we can't plan for an order transition if we don't decide. So, and this is if we think about the government, but same about business. Sustainability is a great competitive advantage, and it's up to all leaders to fight for it, because it's not just an issue now, and it's going to be worse and worse, because the science is crystal clear, and it was clear. Unfortunately, I didn't know at the time. It was clear since what was here, even before the Paris Agreement, but at the Paris Agreement, universally, 197 member states, they said, we acknowledge that climate change is a threat to humanity. So they acknowledge that. Where we are today, 6 years after, we are with Australia 28 target to 2030 of the emission reduction, and it's ridiculous. And we are still building this in companies. So honestly, I couldn't do that anymore. This is why I left the job after the QB interim as head of environment. I couldn't do this anymore. And I decided that, okay, I want to do something about that. This is why I started my Protego Terra. It's still not a business. For now, it's a space where there is awareness about climate change and sustainability. I want to transition it as a business, but I was really sick of that environment because it's very hard to stay in the right table and to let the people transition to this. Let's say, to be kind. So I wish I could be more hopeful, but honestly, this is the reality. In Australia, we are nowhere close, not even in government, not even in businesses, for what I've seen. And that's
There's a
what
lot.
I can say. Yeah, that's a lot to do.
Is it possible for you to be objective?
Objective for, what do you mean? This is big objective. This is data.
The objective is for us to transition.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Objective so that we do transition. I believe that because we have to, we will.
Oh, yes. The point is, how much are we going to pay for that? Until we reach that point where we are going to realize all the physical and transitional risks, even in companies, and it's going to be not too late because we still have time. So hopefully for our kids, it's not going to be too late, but absolutely we have a window to try to fix this, but we are not acting in the pace at the pace that we need. So that's a problem. Carbon emissions are still rising. 2021, the International Energy Agency said that it's forecasted to be the biggest year for coal. So what are we talking about? So we need to do more. So my point is not that just looking at the hard data, because it's hard. If we look at the hard data, we say we're not going to do anything, because the energy globally, we still go 80%. Our total planetary energy supply comes 80% from renewable energy. So it's great. Yes, we are improving renewable energies. They are cheaper in several parts of the world, not here, because here, if you want to switch your house to renewable energy, you pay more, and you pay more per kilowatt hours. So honestly, we need more traction. We need all of us to step up and do more. So
I think what that happened was interesting this year was that I think it was last week, or was it this week, that it was in the papers that Adelaide had, a global record. They ran on renewable energy for a period of time. It was
for a week.
Was it for a week? Yeah, I just remember.
Exactly. This is hopeful. In fact, what's happening in Australia, luckily, is that the states aren't waiting for the federal government. So we are going to achieve maybe, I don't know, I don't have the number, I haven't looked at the climate councils yet. Okay, I don't know the numbers, but we are going to achieve even more than the target given from the federal government. This is thanks to the states. So we are here, and this is, I think this is a great thing that the states are coming up on what the government isn't doing. So, and this is why the United Nations Secretary Antonio Guterres said the business and the focus at COP also was a lot on the business because we need to step up. So it's we play a very important part because where there is the top down, there's going to be the bottom up. We need all of them, obviously, and we need also civil society. We need all of us as a citizen. Absolutely, this is not one task, and there's no silver bullet. But so we really, and really, I mean it. We need the government, we need the business, so we need all of us. So it's not going to be solved by one organization or one person or one government. That's the point. It's so hard, and the interconnection, to come back to what Julie was saying, of COVID demonstrated that we are not able to do it. Yes, we can do a vaccine in great times, but still the poor countries, they are not going to receive the vaccines, and this is why we have this new Omicron version. So we are demonstrating that really, are we able to cooperate? So this is just food for brain.
Sarah, you touched on something that was very interesting from the end of last year, actually, and it's a good point when we're talking about government and politics. We had a number of organizations join us right at the end in December, where we talked about politics, where we talked about independent voting for independents that stand for climate change, and the communities actually voting with their voting for change. So their votes make the difference, and actually forcing government to make changes that way. I might just Anthony, do you want to maybe comment on that? I thought that might be really worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. I was listening very carefully, Sarah, to what you were saying and to what everyone else has shared. And like you, I went through a period of time actually last year, early to mid last year, feeling quite powerless. And I remember when there was an incident, I don't know the names and all the details, but I do remember there was a woman who unfortunately was raped in the government buildings in Canberra. And a security guard found her, checked that no assets were damaged or stolen, and then left her. And when that happened, when that came to light, I thought, wow, what sort of culture do we have in the leadership group that allows that to be the way we do things around here? And I think I actually remember the Prime Minister's wife told him, gee, that's really wrong. Initially, he didn't condemn it. He didn't criticize it. He stayed away from it. And we can understand why a leader would want to do that, doesn't want to put his name to anything or doesn't want to get involved in something highly controversial. My view is that we need to lean into issues that are controversial. We need to actually stand tall, face straight into them, have the conversations that we're having right now, and then ideally take action. And when his wife said, that's really bad, you should comment on it and criticize and condemn it, then he did. But I thought to myself, what are the chances that we can get, my intention is not to have a go at one individual being the current Prime Minister, but rather to look at the system that allows that kind of behavior to proliferate. So in the middle of last year, when I'm hearing those things and I'm seeing that it took a strike, student strike for climate, and 300,000 young kids to turn up to a strike to persuade our country's leader to go to the COP26 conference. Again, I thought, what are our chances of actually navigating this? But I must say, I've really been encouraged. In fact, I've been inspired by, we've actually had one of the leaders of Student Strike for Change start turning up to the Symphony 7 forums and workshops and get-togethers. Vlad, I don't remember whether it was he or you or someone who invited parents for climate change, which is very closely associated now with Student Strike for Climate, to turn up to one of the sessions. And then I know you invited a woman from Climate 200. And once I heard that lady speak, I was really inspired, because she explained that you don't need a majority of people in either of the houses to get real change to happen. you only need about 8 independents to be able to create a complete shift. Essentially, the way she explained it was that if you have 8 independents, it can actually force decision making to require that they get all 8 independents on side. And then a day or two later, I read in the paper that there's a woman, a surgeon, who's got heaps of qualifications and an unbelievable resume, having looked after a major division of the Children's Hospital, who is standing against Josh Frydenberg in the election. And when I see stuff like that, again, I don't know Josh Frydenberg personally, but I do feel like his and the various other leaders who are in those roles' way of thinking is a very old way of thinking. And it served us and many other countries very well 100 years ago to get organized and to create shift and to organize finances and industry, etc. But when I see those models operating now, my belief is they are very outdated. And I believe that conversations like this, followed by action, can actually shift systems. I choose to believe that it's completely doable. And that really is one of the major reasons that we're growing this whole community called Symphony 7. We don't need 1 billion people in the community. We only need a certain number who passionately believe that it is possible and who behave in a certain direction to really effect positive change. So, Vlad, in answer to your original question, last year versus this year, for me, the last year and the one before were years of enforced isolation in many countries, including and especially Australia. I think we hold the world record. But with the isolation, I think has come a lot of time and opportunity for reflection. I'll pop the Ria Sokol video in the chat so everyone can watch it. I think it's been watched 500,000 times. It's a 2-minute video, and it's a brilliant opportunity where she explains that it's actually called Thank You Coronavirus, in which she thanks the virus for forcing us to slow down and for forcing us to just stop and think, is this what we really want? And what do we really want for the planet and for our lives? And do we want to keep pursuing money at all costs, or do we want more meaningful lives based on sustainability and the option to create a wonderful planet for everyone? I choose option B. I strongly suspect that every member of Symphony 7 chooses option B. And I believe it's our pleasant opportunity to get organized and to really go after it, and to go after it quickly. Because if, what we do over the next 3 weeks, 3 months, and 3 years will have a profound impact on where the state of the planet is at 10 years and 15 years from now. So, Vlad, I think the big opportunity for 2022 is action.
Can I just, I think on that note, I don't know, this is my main reflection for 2021. It seems like the chatter and the noise, the debate has died down. People are not debating whether or not this is a thing to do anymore. It's now like, yep, okay, there's a problem. Not quite sure how complex this is, but we need to do something. We don't know what. But to me, that's a massive shift, because finding all the people who are debating whether or not it's a thing is a lot more effort than figuring out what needs to be done, which is then a question of feasibility, economic, political, technology. And I wonder, is that, has anyone else seen that as well? This shift from debating whether or not it's a thing or whether or not we should take it serious to something that is just there and it's real and we need to do something about it?
100%.
Can I just say something about that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I totally agree. I believe the paradigm has shifted. It's not about discussing it, oh, it's there and so forth. It's about suddenly we do need to take action, and we need to take action now. And that's been the shift. And it's a noticeable shift. I have something in my mouth. So it has shifted is probably the right term to use. Yes, I agree.
It's really insightful. Maurice. And do you think that that's going to be, so this year, it's not, do you think the question of do we or don't we is just not even going to be talked about? I mean, just people just go, stop talking about on.
The who is it? Who came up with the idea of the tipping point? I want to say Malcolm Gladwell, but
It is Gladwell,
yeah,
yeah.
I think
it
it
was
is.
Malcolm Gladwell.
And so just think using that as sort of an analysis to say, well, if enough of the population are going, yes, this is a problem and now we need to do something, it becomes a lot easier. It's that first, 16% of the population, that's the really hard yards where you have to convince people, you have to fight tooth and nail. But then once you hit that, now it's a question, and it perhaps also changes the approach. Like, it's no longer about debating and trying to convince people. It's about, how do we make this happen? How do we make it happen fast? How do we make it feasible economically? And so it changes the conversation as well, right? And I think it will accelerate now.
I think that is absolutely correct. And you just hit a number of points that I want to make at the end as well, Marisa, but I will just touch on something that I think is 100%, which is that where things would wait, suddenly we're seeing everything that looks like it has, in Stephen's words, good ROI and, reduced risk, suddenly everyone piles in and fast. We've seen this in, waste as a resource. Absolutely. Suddenly, people are scrambling to get the waste. It's just suddenly it's not about, there's something we don't want to talk about. It's something like, hold on a sec, we want access to that. We're seeing that in every area where there's a clear shift in, the resources being sustainable. People, investors, businesses are piling in, and faster than ever before. It's not even a question of, well, will it be? Is it? Suddenly they're really going for it, and we're seeing that in the circular economy in a big way as well. The states, the cities, they're doubling down on the conversation around circular economy, circularity. Donut economy. We had that amazing presentation early in 2021, and we're seeing that really just play out in execution. I think 2022 it's going to be incredible. So thanks. That's exactly right. And last but not least, Matt, I've got you last one on my screen.
To pick up on some of your comments and Maurice's. So I guess for us operating in two sectors, seeing a couple of things happening. Maurice, you're right. The big issue is really around how we're transitioning, and that can be in the recycling sector obviously as well, but the other side of that is who's going to pay. So there's a lot of things happening there, and being involved in the two sectors, we see real contrast, because basically business is resetting at the moment, and they will do environmental where they see a visible benefit to it. But when you start coming to service sectors, both government and business will go do things like NABERS 5-star ratings on the buildings, but that doesn't really cover the services going into the buildings a lot of the time. So they don't care. They go back, they're reverting to the dollar. Fortunately, from the cleaning perspective, a lot of our suppliers are actually doing a lot of the work in terms of the recycling and greener products and those type of things. Probably one of the big areas I still see a barrier is just simple things like use of plastic bags. It's something often and things like papers, where that's coming from. So, and I think you're going to see government resetting from a dollar perspective as well. And typically they see services as an expensive thing, and that's sometimes where that driving of the dollar is actually going to kick in ahead of environmental type services. On the recycling side, a lot more positive story, because obviously you're seeing the federal government even advertising, recycling programs now. I think it's going back into recycling. So the fact that we're in an election year, federally here in Victoria, South Australia, not sure where else. I think New South Wales is next year, I think. So the governments are in a really contrasting thing. They've spent a lot of money in the last 2 years, so they're going to want to save some money over here. But at the same time, we've had the whole legislation around exporting waste starting to kick in now in a big way. And also governments are now after some really good stories. And a lot of those good stories, they're looking to the waste industry as a positive way to get those. So not just obviously cladding, like I mentioned, tyres, clad, just basically anything and everything. And we heard some concrete talk earlier. There's universities here. There's just some massive work being done around concrete. So I think that side is going to be really, that's a really sweet spot for the next couple of years in the circular economy and recycling sectors, which is really important. So that side is going to be massively positive. There's just so much opportunity in there to do some good things.
And one of the things that I love, with that, with the work you're doing in cladding, especially, like the part of it is also recycling the steel, and interesting how that leads to a conversation. So actually, it's recycling aluminium, isn't it? It's aluminium, and how that has led to some interesting conversations around steel and and green steel, and suddenly it's like, well, hold on a second. So there's other resources that we can actually transform to separate the hydrogen, say from the syngas or whatever, and use that in green steel instead of maybe not in vehicles, but maybe in the creation of and the recycling of other materials. People are really, really starting to double down on this thinking about, we take it, we use it, and what are all the elements? One of the things why, you touched on tire recycling. One of the things why we're having probably the most interesting conversations around tires is that it's not just about chopping it up and using it, in roads. We're seeing technology, which, David, you're talking about the Japanese companies as well, so when we're seeing this technology that's being implemented around the world that takes these tires and separates, the char, but it's okay, the char becomes activated charcoal, you see the syngas, and you split out and you've got hydrogen, and, there's so many different things, including, research in carbon nanotubes. So upcycling and doing something more with it, including, a conversation that we're actually having this afternoon with an incredible company that does devulcanization, so they take the tires and they devulcanize it and turn it into a base that can be made into new tires, creating an opportunity for an industry that just wasn't here before in Australia. So it's just the conversations around waste and recycling is much more circular conversation, isn't it?
It's the reality is the right incentives in place now for people to, it's up to everyone's imagination, basically. World's the oyster in that recycling space. So because the incentives there's going to be a lot more happening and products that are actually being recycled. So
yeah.
I just get frustrated when the property manager provides me plastic bags for my cleaners to collect their recycled products into, and they then have to tip the recycling into one bin and chuck the plastic bag in the other one. So it's just bizarre. So yeah.
Thanks, Matt, and I love this. I feel like our conversation has come really full circle, where we've talked about politics as well. We've talked about the circularity. We've talked about government needs to do products, and probably a couple of things that are still on my list that I just wanted to touch on. And I really appreciate everyone's input, and being mindful that it's a very large community that we've built over the last 12 months. So there's been a lot of things that we've done. A couple of things that have also stood out is one, the level of investment in the entire space has really shifted. There was so much conversation for a long time about what's the latest tech, and VCs would invest in particular technologies where you can build IP and so forth, and get your returns. But there's much greater shift now to conversations around about infrastructure, setting up the correct infrastructure to allow these technologies to thrive. So we had, Stephanie Thornton, who couldn't make it today, unfortunately, but, creating an infrastructure for ocean energy to actually be a thing. We need that support. There needs to be the networks, the onshore, offshore resource connections have to be there to allow the technology to actually, to work. When we look at the circular economy village development, we need resources that are close to be able to deliver those the materials to actually build the housing, the roads, the infrastructure, and so forth, to create these circular economy, villages, buildings, and so forth, communities. And so the investment conversation has really shifted to one often was, in other areas, which is very much the traditional industries, now in this space in circular industries, around infrastructure, investing in the infrastructure to build out those opportunities, identifying land, place, and so forth, where that change, the demonstration projects, the breaking down existing rules and creating new technologies and new ways of doing things can actually happen. And that's where I find really interesting investment conversations are happening. So, and ESG reporting, it used to be a nothing. It used to be just something that was, on the periphery. Towards the end of last year, ESG reporting became huge. And this year, I think that's going to be, we're seeing ESG consulting businesses popping up everywhere because it's needed. People need to report. Investors need to see that the businesses that are invested in meet the ESG requirements. And not even specifically talking about SDGs, but literally what are the ESG reporting? And maybe, Stephen, are you seeing much in this space? I know you guys get involved in ESG type work. Is it something that you're seeing a big shift in this coming year?
We are mostly centered around the concept of materiality. So ESG is just another way to slice and dice sustainability more broadly. So it's just another jargon term. ESG is more directed by boards. They're more tuned into ESG as a concept and CSR, so that corporate social responsibility. But yeah, it's just another part of the broader language that we use. So circularity, circular economy, net zero, ESG, sustainability.
And you're right, though, the boards is critical. I did want to just give Julie a chance just to comment on that as well. Considering the number of boards you sit on, how prevalent is that conversation around?
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. In 2021, August, I think it was, the Institute of Company Directors launched climate governance as an initiative. Now that actually has obviously been elsewhere in the world, but the AICD, Institute of Company Directors, took it on. They've done a lot of education since that time to say, hey guys, you're directors, you need to look at risk for the business as a whole, and you have to obviously consider the impact of climate risk on your business. So how are you doing that? And look, it's not a hard concept to get your head around, really, because directors are very used to looking at risks and opportunities, and we probably all are in this virtual room. So what's the risk in our business? With a director hat on, what are the forthcoming risks given the business model that we have, and given climate in particular, what are the opportunities that come from that? So companies like Lend-Lease, EDI Downer, they've been sort of in this space for some time, and they have quite well developed sustainability committees, which are subcommittees of the board, and they would do a lot of that accounting stuff, that ESG reporting. They would put it out to their shareholders, what they're doing. So, but I think what directors, of companies that are not like Lend-Lease, that have been living and breathing it for a while. All companies need to consider that. So one of my boards is a health entity, which is Bendigo Health. It's actually huge. It's got 4,000 staff. But when and I'm chair of the governance, the audit and risk committee there. So I've said, well, hey guys, you need to look at this. So let's educate the directors first, because obviously I've probably got more knowledge than the rest of them, but we all have to be on the same page. So you have to educate directors, educate executives, look at the business model. What are the risks and opportunities? What is coming down the pipeline as a result of climate risk that we have to look at? So if every company does that, if every individual understands what they can do as a result of their impact on the planet, if governments actually understand that we can't just be looking after their, getting into government next time around, which is really where the coalition is at the moment. They're scrambling and they're not winning in this country. And I think the people are going to, democratically, they're going to say, well, that's not good enough. So the federal election coming, I think, is going to be very interesting. So I've diverted there into politics. I apologise for that. Right. but just to say that as a director, we have a lot of responsibilities, big, small, whatever company that we're responsible for. Greening Australia, I have obviously a huge responsibility. A lot of their business model is revegetation. It is providing carbon credits and selling it to the likes of Woodside. So every entity has its place. So if it's embedded and it just becomes, just like risk management is, that's what you do. If we all do that, then we're gonna really move mountains.
Yeah, agreed 100%, and it is reflected very strongly in the investment space. So if I put just my SDGX hat on for a minute, we're seeing it. Impact investment is a massive conversation all the way through to the super funds. Yeah, whereas it was very niche, now we're seeing it to be much more of a mainstream conversation, right? Exactly right. No, thank you so much, Julie. I appreciate it. And look, thank you, everyone. I don't believe I missed anyone. I went through everybody on the screen. Thank you so much. Can I just ask, are there any other, insights before we just pause and have a conversation about Symphony 7 and 2022? And I want to open the floor to Anthony to talk about that. Any other comments? Just to speak up. Go ahead, Maurice. I can see you want to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick one. I was trip to Thailand, and on the flight from Singapore to Bangkok, they had all the food and stuff was in biopack. Right, and I was like, that's cool. Right, so that's interesting. And in Bangkok themselves, they've started making boats electric, like doing a bunch of things. But then went out to the rural areas, and you go to the 7-Eleven, and they give you, your plastic bottle in a plastic bag with a plastic straw that's in a plastic bag again, and you have that contrast, and it's quite crazy. But at the same time, and I guess that just the thing I wanted to share was potentially there's a lot more opportunity to change things and change things quickly in countries like that, where the systems aren't quite yet set up. You don't have to change an old system, you just have to build a new one. And when looking at things like, telephone or landlines in Africa, they didn't have landlines. They just went straight to mobile. So is there potentially ways to fast track that? And instead of just looking in Australia, what can we do? Taking the technologies, the talent, the expertise, and going, how can we use that to create industries abroad as well that can benefit things. So I just wanted to share that as a insight.
That's really insightful. That's really insightful. Go ahead, Julie.
Oh, just one comment that hit me when I was speaking to a lady in the UK. Her name's, oh, sorry, that was my phone. her name is Tia Kansana, and I think you know her, Flad.
Yeah.
Because she's actually has a company called Replenish Earth in the UK, and she went along to COP26. And I caught up with her the other day, and she said, I said, what's your take on COP26, Tia? And she talked about a concept called global commons, which I think is really like, I don't know whether you sort of understand that, but it's sort of like, it's not the national, it's sort of the global commons is everything in the world, like us as a planet, if you like. And she said, well, if we can actually think about this issue in terms of being citizens of the earth, rather than citizens of Australia, then perhaps we might actually get more positive outcomes from those talk fest that you have at COP26, because what tends to happen is that the nation that you're from, all the domestic issues just consume the airspace. But if we can think that we are citizens of the earth, then maybe that's something that might get us to this deadline of, global warming in 2030. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's just a thought. What do you think, Vlad?
I think we must, and it's interesting you say that, because it's so important to participate in groups where it's not just ultra local. I think that's important too, but to also reach out and individually participate in those groups that are, whether it be global or just regional, to participate, understand what's happening, and share and collaborate. I think that's really critical. We saw last year in 2021 especially, so many individuals from different countries, from different organizations around the world come and share their experience, share their projects. Earth 5R, they're working with 3 different countries cleaning up rivers around the world. We had those doing impact investment from the UK, the US. This is that global shift where everyone is talking about it, sharing information, going, we can do this, potentially not even waiting for government. I think we saw in 2021, and we're going to see more in 2022. It's that, is there an economic model? What is the technology? Why are we waiting? Let's go for it. And the acceptance of carbon credits globally is going to be one of the biggest, I think, investment opportunities around the world to implement real sustainable projects. We're seeing projects that just on carbon credits alone can be fully funded. So investors go, great, we'll go with that. It's going to be incredible. 2022 is going to be absolutely incredible, I think. It's going to be a watershed year. I really do believe so. All right, sorry, any other comments? And before I pass over to Anthony, it's been really amazing. David, go ahead.
Yeah, Vlad, there's a lot of the comments being made this morning that I've been thinking about a long time in terms of our political environment, which is something that most democratic countries suffer from. We have a saying, there's nothing like a good dictator, but only if they're heading in the same direction as you want to go. And does anyone know if the federal politicians have to report where their investments are? I know they have to report when they receive money and donations, but do they actually have to publish where their investments are?
I think they have to report it in some way.
Yeah, is there any way we can make that sort of thing visible, highly visible, being an election year? Because at the moment it looks like a very much bottom-up approach in Australia, and a lot of that's been determined from the federal government makes a lot of money in royalties from people digging holes in the ground, and they need to find a replacement for those funds. Nobody's worked out how to tax the sun or the wind, but they sure know how to tax digging holes in the ground. So for me, we've got to look at ways, if we're going to take a top-down approach to this, how do we get the right people in those positions that can push this faster than the bottom-up approach that we currently have?
it's also, I would only comment that I think that is exactly the right conversation to be had. We need to have visibility, but also support those that do stand for the right things, that we believe in. And so I think that potentially having a look at Climate 200 is an interesting group, but there's others as well. And that the group was also astounding, the Parents for Climate Change, which was formed because the student strike group, all these parents are like, hold on, our kids are standing up, they're doing something, shouldn't we take a stand as well? And that's where they were formed. There was a really interesting presentation at the end of last year from that group, from Ursula especially. So I think you're right, we need to definitely have that approach. And there are groups that are actively doing that. And I think that to maybe bring some of those here into the community, but also reach out, invite them to share that, David, or others, I think that's going to be actually really important. Yeah, for sure. Really interesting point. Okay, thank you so much. So thank you everyone for all your comments and input. I have gone through the entire list. Every single thing is ticked off that I want to make sure that we mentioned. I'm sure though that Anthony, there'll be more than a group. There's a long list of collaborations and projects that started, through these kind of communications and meetings last year. We started in January, and since then I sort of lost track after about 50 collaborations that turned into incredible things. These ranged from recycling projects to plastic into other materials. Lots of circular economy conversations. There are groups that are forming in so many locations across the country and the world. River cleaning, ocean energy. One of my favorite comments was when Jan from BASF said, "Just give us all your plastics, we can take care of it." Chemistry is the solution to everything. And the conversation is really broad. 2022, we're going to really double down on impact and those that are creating impact and measurable impact. So I think we'll still have quite a broad selection, but there'll be some really interesting shifts and developments in the group. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite Anthony to maybe take us out to the end. There's 15 minutes to go. There's some really interesting things, some incredible things 67 is doing. And we're very lucky to be a group that has that support and infrastructure that Anthony and the team have been delivering. So Anthony, would you like to share something around Symphony 7 and what 2022 is going to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I start by just harnessing some of the language skills we've got? And I'm going to ask each of Maurice, German, French, Sarah, Italian, Murray, Japanese, and you, Vlad, Russian. Julie, if you can give us your best English accent, that English actually is a language. How do we say in those various languages, I'll start with Sarah in Italian, anything is possible?
Tutto è possibile.
Tutto è possibile.
Tutto è possibile.
Tutto è possibile. Fantastic. Any idea how to say that in Japanese, Murray? You're on mute.
Not at the moment. Give me a second.
Okay.
I've got my new dictionaries here.
Maurice, whether it's German or French or both, how do we say anything is possible?
Tout est possible and alles ist möglich.
Alles ist möglich.
Yeah.
Alles ist möglich. Julie, in the Queen's English, how would we say that?
Queen's English. Anything is possible.
Anything is possible. 100% anything is possible, especially if we have intention and if we have vibration and energy, and if we take one more word I'm looking for. If we take
action.
100% if we take action. So I had the good privilege, I'll share screen straight away. I had the good privilege of an amazing session with the advisory board, which I must disclose includes Julie Green, and our vision has essentially remained the same. Our vision remains the same, to continue building a global community of people and businesses which collaborate to pursue business as a force for good, to positively impact the planet and the lives of at least 1 billion people by December 2035. So we've got 13 years and 11 months remaining. The inspiration for doing this remains the same. I was brought up in what you might call racist apartheid South Africa. A lot of people, I think, have seen this photo. Not so many people have seen this photo, but this is me aged 2 on the beach with Christina, who was only allowed on the beach if she was minding the white children and wearing the maid's overalls. This is me and Christina on the same beach all those years later, apartheid having fallen over, and I saw what was possible with change and with transformation. And when I think about my family now, this is me and my son and my daughter and my wife, the whole thing feels like an absolute miracle to me. And I was pushed, encouraged by the advisory board to really contemplate the question in November and December around how are we going to get to this magical number of 1 billion? Because what we worked out is, even if we miraculously grew the Symphony 7 community here in Australia to 3,000 members, 4,000 members, 5,000 members, and even if we scaled that on a global basis, and even if we somehow miraculously were able to see every single member experience growth of their business and contribute a small percentage of their extra profits to the uplift of humanity and the planet, we still would not get to that magical number of 1 billion. So the advisory board asked me one important question: how can we move towards scale? How can we scale the impact, and how can we do it quicker? And I'm very grateful, because that question prompted a lot of thinking on my part and discussion between us. And where we arrived is at a conclusion that first of all, if we focus on the two biggest problems in the world, one being climate impact and the other being gender equality and inclusion, if we can really have a red hot crack at these two problems and solve them, then the remaining sustainable development goals will be a lot easier to achieve. And in fact, in many areas, they will come together and be solved just because these first two are solved. So if we say, okay, let's focus very strongly on these two problems, we already have a growth and transformation hub, which is fast becoming a venture. There's members of the group who will, in a constructive way, turn the hub into a PDY Limited, a company that stands side by side with Symphony 7. And here's the really interesting piece. We've identified that if we can identify and work with this year 3 organizations that we're referring to as 10x squared organizations. The first 10x is they really have the capability and the desire to disrupt an industry. They're not a small organization that wants to grow to become a boutique organization that might generate 1 or 2 million in revenue. They want to make a big disruption, whether it's in the energy space, in the politics space, in some area. They're going to cause a huge disruption. That's the first 10x. The second 10x is if we are able to support them on their journey to get from point A to point B as a startup, or from point C to point D as a scale up, then they have the capacity and the capability to positively impact the lives of at least 10 million people. And the interesting thing is, David, no offense or disrespect that we don't have your logo in here. Perhaps you are potentially a 10x organization. We just haven't had that depth of discussion with you yet. What's interesting is we're already talking to, we've got 5 logos up here, but we're talking to 7 organizations who we believe may be a 10x squared organization. And we only want to work with 3 this year. We want to prove the model this year. And then as of next year, we want to scale. If we do the mathematics, 100 of these organizations, each achieving 10 million positive impacts for human beings, equals 1 billion. Julie, I know you've got a strong background in finance and numbers. Did I get those numbers right? 100 times 10 million equals a billion.
Yeah, billion, yeah.
Okay, so once we think about it that way, the number of 1 billion gets smaller and smaller. And some people might say, no, you're kidding. You'll never find a 10x organization who could possibly impact 10 million people. I'm pleased to say that multiple of the organizations in here have that capability, and we already have, I'm going to call it an advanced conversation in progress with RedGrid. I believe they won't impact 10 million. I believe they'll impact at least 100 million people as they become really successful and scale up the solution that they've already brought to market. They're no longer an idea on the back of a serviette. Their financial backer and investor is Mervac. They've already done a lot of research and their case studies, etc., through Monash University. And the idea is, as we select these 10x organizations, we also then work with them to purpose build a hub that can surround them. So I'll keep working on the RedGrid idea. RedGrid right now need to meet a lot of developers. So what if we were able to work together? Matt, I know you know a lot of people in the property arena. I know you were part of the original group when we were thinking property hub. What if we were to purpose build a property and construction hub whose primary purpose is actually to look after each other? In the first instance, their primary responsibility is to undertake a journey of transformation to look after self, team, and business, and community, i.e. the hub. The secondary responsibility then would be to look after RedGrid and to help ensure the success of RedGrid. So the idea then is we surround RedGrid with the unbelievable skills and talents that are in the G&T venture, and that we also then have a purpose-built hub. And then simultaneously, we have already appointed Sonia Moray to help build out the corporate hub, which will consist of a hub of stakeholders and a hub of the top business development people who work for those corporations. And we've already in the past built a number of CXO collectives. This is groups of senior executives, CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, a few non-exec directors. We've already done that multiple times. The difference in the one that we're building this year is that the key purpose of the group is to go after impact. So these will be decision makers in industry who really want to go after impact. And we know a lot of the corporate organizations find this group very attractive because number one, it's a great way for them to meet some of the decision makers they've never met before. And number two, it's a great way for them to add value to some of the senior execs in their existing portfolio of customers. So when I look at this as an overall map and I think about the access to people and industry and decision makers that we're building through here, I can't help but question what is possible if we can selectively gain access for members of the G&T venture to the various decision makers. Same for the purpose-built hubs. Same for the 10x squared organizations. And if we're all united by the values around the care for humanity and the planet, and I've seen now several examples in the community of extreme collaboration and extreme behavior around together we're better. I mean, Julie, when Larry Green offered for your daughter to stay at his place 4 nights a week indefinitely so that she could easily access uni, and he had never met you, but he just knew you were part of Symphony 7, that told me about the power of humanity, and it told me about the power of cohesion in a group and what's possible when people start to have each other's backs. So the key idea for this year, our strategic priorities include get this venture up and singing, identify and start working with 3 of these 10x squared organizations, probably 2 this side of June and 1 after June, build these purpose-built hubs, build out the corporate impact hub. We've already started this CXO Impact Collective. It has 6 members. We'll probably build that out to 30 or 40. And I just feel super excited when I look at this map and I think this also is not a diagram on the back of a serviette. Most of this is already in progress. When I think about all that, It's a great privilege for me to be part of this. I want to express my gratitude to all the members in this particular group, because not only your subscriptions, but your intent and your conversations and your actions is what make this journey sustainable. It's what's making the Symphony 7 vision and community sustainable. And to say I'm excited for 2022 and 2023 is a huge understatement. I understand the COVID context. I understand a lot of people are in a challenged position, but I believe that transformation is possible. I firmly believe that together we're better, and I'm super excited about the opportunity for us to work together and to deliver amazing change for each other, with each other, and for humanity and the planet. That's the plan for 2022.
Amazing. Oh, and that's fantastic. And I think this. Thank you so much, Anthony. And to add, those who've been with us this year or joined later and so forth, how large the community is, and how many high impact groups and companies and individuals participate. It's not any particular, we're talking about both politics, technology and so forth, infrastructure. So this year, I think it's going to be quite extraordinary, especially with that kind of focus, Anthony, because it really brings the groups together and really doubles down on the work that this hub and the Growth Transformation Hub has been doing. So thank you so much for that support.
I can see the time, Vlad. Can I ask for Sarah? How do we pronounce your name? What's the Italian pronunciation?
It's Sara.
Sara. Can I ask Sara, please, to help me close my piece with a translation? Can you tell us in English, how do you say, andiamo, andiamo?
Let's go, let's go.
Lovely. All right, well then let's go. I think it's time to bring our session to a close. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll share this in the group and on LinkedIn community for the videos for everyone to enjoy in their own time. So thank you. We'll see you all in a month, and there's going to be lots of communications, I feel, over the coming weeks, especially with the development of the 10x squared companies. So thank you, everyone. Feel free to stay on for a few minutes if you want to say anything more or say hello. Andiamo.
Andiamo.
Ciao, everybody.